Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches English Language and Literature A-Level. This video is going to focus on giving you some comparisons of Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby with Shakespeare's Othello. I'm just going to have a little look at two characters, Bianca and Myrtle, and look at how they're presented and sort of how they function within the respective texts, drawing particularly in this case on some similarities. Each of these videos will just look at either a small theme or idea or a character. They're not sort of essay plans, but they're interesting little comparative nuggets that can be put into a range of different essays. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so one major similarity between Bianca and Myrtle is that they are sexualized characters. Both are very much objectified and they're used as almost sexual tools for the men around them. Have a little look at the way that Fitzgerald writes the first time we see Myrtle. She was in the middle 30s and faintly stout, but carried her flesh sensuously, as some women can. Her face, above a spotted dress of dark blue crepe de chine, contained no facet or gleam of beauty, but there was an immediately perceptible vitality about her, as if the nerves of her body were continually smouldering. So we've got language to do with heat here, very, very kind of typical sort of sexual symbolism. And I think it is interesting that Fitzgerald points out that Myrtle is not beautiful. You can be sexualized without being traditionally beautiful. In fact, in some cases, you could argue that there is something quite ugly in some ways about highly sexualized women through this lens. I don't mean me, I don't think that. Because, you know, it's the kind of idea about being engaged with the sort of more base desires where someone virginal, someone chaste would normally be considered beautiful. So Fitzgerald, through the eyes of Nick here, so Nick views her in this way. He sort of, he finds her unattractive but very sexual. Likewise, Bianca is sexualized. Now, this is, she's a really interesting character in terms of her role. Now, when Shakespeare originally wrote the play, he didn't specify in the cast list who she was, other than a woman that Cassio was involved with. But in later editions, she's actually named as a prostitute. And certainly Iago uses insults that suggest that she is a prostitute. He calls her a housewife that by selling her desires buys herself bread and clothes. That doesn't actually mean that she is a prostitute, but the fact is that she is treated as if she were. The fact that she is engaging in a sexual relationship with Cassio immediately makes her of a questionable status for the time, because obviously marriage out of wedlock was expressly forbidden. But if you look at the way that Cassio talks to her, again there is a sort of sense of a sexual relationship once more, but it's about her kind of physicality, her looks. My most fair Bianca, in faith's sweet love, I was coming to your house. So this is a very, very bold move, you know, for the time period. Likewise, Bianca says, I was going to your lodging, Cassio. What, keep a week away? 7 days and 7 nights. So it's quite clear that they've been having this sort of intimate relationship. So both these two characters, Bianca and Myrtle, have sexual relationships with men. They are sexualized in the way that they are described, and they are used for the sexual gratification of men, particularly men of high classes. Which brings me on to my next point. Both characters attempt to rise out of their social classes. So we have Myrtle, or Mrs. Wilson here. We know that she's from the Valley of the Ashes, and you've got this incredible description of the Valley of the Ashes at the beginning of the second chapter with all of its greyness, and then there's Mrs. Wilson in her blue polka dot dress, sort of showing that she sort of sits outside of that, or she wishes to be outside of that. And so by being in a relationship with Tom, this is almost like her version of the American dream, isn't it? It's her way of climbing up that social ladder, just as Gatsby. is trying to do as well. Now, in this bit that I've chosen, I think this is wonderful because I think the sartorial symbolism here is spectacular. So she has changed her outfits 3 times. This is the 3rd outfit, and with this, her status seems to have changed somewhat. Note that she is in an elaborate afternoon dress of cream-coloured chiffon. Now, Daisy wears white, so there is symbolically like this attempt, a failed attempt to reach the heights and the status of Daisy expressed through her clothing, but of course her dress is off-white, and she, under the influence of this dress, that intense vitality changes into oppressive hauteur. So this is like her goal is to become someone of a higher class, and as she kind of leans into this feeling, Fitzgerald shows how affected her behaviours become, and then we've got this amazing metaphor about being on a revolving, noisy, creaking pivot, so sort of like spinning around. And I think I said have a little look at my chapter 2 analysis. I think I look at this bit in quite a bit more detail, but it's almost like she's trying to place herself up on that pedestal, but of course for her it is creaky and noisy. So by being with Tom, she's able to kind of rise up. To quote Jane Austen and Lady Catherine de Bourgh, she's attempting to quit her sphere. And Bianca, you could argue is similar, but there's no kind of suggestion that she's sort of getting like that her motivations are class-based, but the fact is that she has fallen in love with Cassio, who is of a much higher status. And if we take Iago's words to be true here, that Bianca is talking about the idea of them getting married, that's quite significant. For Cassio to marry her, that would have to be a love match, because clearly they are of different statuses, and she's having sex with him outside of wedlock, something that she thinks is a symbol of their love, but for Cassio it's quite clearly not. Further evidence here again about this idea about her being a prostitute. Iago says, yeah, it is a creature that dotes on Cassio. So dotes as a verb really kind of suggests strong feelings of love. And then he says "'tis the strumpet's plague to beguile many and be beguiled by one." Is it? Are there all of these prostitutes falling in love with the people that pay for sex with them? I'm not entirely certain, unless Shakespeare could see ahead and had sort of envisioned Pretty Woman starring Julia Roberts. But no. So again, we've got this idea that if Bianca's love for Cassio is genuine, which I think it is, her hope is to marry up, you know, because Cassio is of a higher position. One might argue that characters who attempt to rise out and up from whence they came, but quitting their sphere, ultimately are punished for those actions. Myrtle clearly dies at the end of it, having been rejected by Tom. More on that later. And Bianca is blamed for Cassio's the violence towards Cassio. Again, we'll look at that in a little bit of time. So both Bianca and Myrtle are subjects of scorn, derision and abuse at the hands of their lovers. If you get a question on relationships, this is really, really useful stuff. 2 things to talk about with Myrtle. This all comes from chapter 2. Obviously you've got the violence. Of course you've got the violence. It's easy to talk about the short, deft movement. Tom Buchanan broke her nose with his open hand. There's so much to say about that. You know, the adjectives that suggest that this is a practiced move, the fact that afterwards she's bleeding fluently, again, a metaphor that suggests that this is rehearsed, this has happened many a time. I think we can agree, we can assume that he is violent to her regularly. But it's not just the physical violence, it's the scorn. Yeah, I like these words that I've used, scorn and derision. This is when McKee is talking about how he just wants to get his foot in the door with the more people from, you know, East Egg and such. "Ask Myrtle," said Tom, breaking into a short shout of laughter as Mrs. Wilson entered with a tray. "She'll give you a letter of introduction, won't you, Myrtle?" And then he goes on to make fun of the idea of taking photos of George at the gas pump. What he's mocking her here for is her class. How abhorrent is that? And she is oblivious to the scorn that he uses. And again, you can see that same scorn, that same derision, where Cassio is mocking Bianca, mocking this woman who dotes on him. She haunts me in every place. That metaphor, she haunts. There's a sort of an irritation of her persistence. Again, emphasised there through the adverbial, in every place. I was the other day talking on the sea bank with certain Venetians, and thither comes this bauble. Okay, so a trinket, just a pretty plaything. So lovely objectification there, metaphor. And by this hand she falls me thus about my neck, so hangs and lolls and weeps upon me, so hails and pulls me. Note the listing here of the actions alike, and how that really emphasizes his mockery of her. You could almost imagine him acting it out in this moment. The ellipsis there is because obviously I've removed Othello's interjection, because of course this is a moment where Othello thinks that he's talking about Desdemona, but this is his true and genuine response to Bianca's love for him. Now, this moment, if you got a question on relationships and maybe you'd already looked a little bit at Cassio and Bianca, and you wanted to go elsewhere, you know, of course you could look at Iago and Emilia here as well for that scorn. You know, it is a common thing to have a foolish wife and all of that stuff from Act 2 scene 1. Act 2 scene 1, where you know, they're waiting for everyone to come back on board and Cassio kisses her, and you know, all of that stuff would work here really well as well. I think my final point, which sort of loops back to what I was saying before, is that both Myrtle and Bianca are ultimately punished by the patriarchal structures that they're confined to. Myrtle's dream, right, is to quit her sphere, rise up, just like Gatsby. She sees Tom as a way through. That's not to say that she doesn't love him. I think she does. And then towards the end, Tom and obviously Wilson has found out that Myrtle's having an affair, but doesn't know it's Tom, and they have that conversation. And I think this bit is so interesting. I stared at him and then at Tom, who had made a parallel discovery less than an hour before. So this is when, like, he's looking at Wilson sick with guilt and horror and sadness and anger about finding out that Myrtle's been having an affair. And Tom says, "I'll let you have that car. I'll send it over tomorrow." Okay, so cars and Gatsby are so symbolic. It's representative of relationships. There's the Jordan car metaphor, which I'm going to do another video on because I love that bit. But in this case, the car, right, has been the method for Tom and Myrtle's relationship to go on. It's been the reason for the contact. So when Tom says, "I'll give you that car," it's like a transaction. Wilson obviously not knowing, but what Fitzgerald is pointing to is that Tom is giving back Myrtle. It's like he's handing her back, "I'll give you that car." So Tom decides that the relationship is over in that moment, without any conversation with Myrtle. But of course this triggers the sequence of events, because of course Myrtle, up at the window, sees Tom in that car, which is why later she runs out when the car is going, but this time driven by Daisy, and then which results in her death. So I'm not saying it's Tom's fault that she died. I'm saying that his ability to just hand her back because of his position of power led to her desperation in trying to get hold of him. And look at this again in her death, still sexualized. So there's this kind of there's almost like a kind of cyclical nature to Myrtle's life here. Like she opened, like when we first meet her, she's sexualized, and then in the end she's sexualized, perhaps suggesting that is all she is this sort of sexual tool for men to use. And the fact that her blood, I'm not sure if I've got it in this bit, but have a little look at this section and you'll find it. It talks about her blood mingling with the ground. So it's that reminder that she has never managed to break free of the Valley of Ashes. Like she remains there now forever, for eternity. And Bianca is also punished by patriarchal structures because she has so little power within the world that she is in. She is such an easy tool for use that in that moment where Cassio has been stabbed at the end of the play, Iago, just by her very presence, is able to suggest to all of the men in the positions of power that Bianca has been a part of the ruse, that she is one of the reasons for Cassio's injury. And he uses the same tactics that he does on everybody else. Okay, look at all of the language which is to do with observation. Look, you pale. Do you perceive the ghastness of her eyes? Yeah? Behold her well. This echoes what he said to Othello about Desdemona. Look to her, observe her, wear your eyes thus. Look upon her. Do you see, gentlemen? So he's trying to create ocular proof based on the fact that she's pale. And why is she pale? Her lover is bleeding out in front of her. But because of her position within society, she can just be used. Iago can just use her as a pawn in this moment for his gain. And so he does. I think that's it from me. That was obviously just like a little tidbit. I know it's not like an essay. I know you're not going to get a question saying compare Bianca and Myrtle. But I think any question on gender, on women specifically, on relationships, on love, on suffering, on violence, anything like this, this comparison I think is really tight. I think it's a really nice, neat one, and you can use bits of it for lots of different ones. I will make you some more videos, and it will be similar to this. It won't be like, here is an essay plan. It will be, here are some interesting comparisons, okay, for you just to kind of do what you wish with. Right, I hope that helped. Give me a shout if you need anything in the comments. I will get back to you. Otherwise, thank you very much and happy revising.